The Wario Land series can be neatly sorted into three categories. Wario Land 1 and Virtual Boy Wario Land are more linear experiences that are closest to the Mario series in terms of core gameplay. Wario Land 2 and 3 stray a lot further from Mario. Levels are more open-ended and have more than one way of completing them, and Wario can't die. Unlike the first two games, there are no power-ups, but enemies themselves can now change how Wario functions. Finally, Wario Land 4 and Wario Land Shake It are kind of a blend of all the gameplay styles I just talked about. The levels are much more linear, but enemies can still interact with Wario, although he can die again. You also have to rush against the time limit to escape each level. I'm gonna talk about these three games mainly because 1. I'm lazy, and 2. I have a lot more to say about these three in particular. So with that out of the way, let's look at some of Nintendo's greatest achievements. Virtual Boy Wario Land is a direct sequel to the first Wario Land game, which was essentially a Mario game but with a few key differences. The main one being that faster-paced gameplay took a bit of a backseat. While Mario would blaze through levels like no one's business, Wario just kind of walks at a slower pace. It was more suited for the Game Boy, as the smaller screen size was not kind to games where going fast was part of the fun. Virtual Boy Wario Land was kind of freed from a lot of those limitations. The screen size is considerably larger, and in general, since the hardware was better, the game plays a lot more smoothly. It's still very close in terms of core gameplay to the Mario series. You go through mostly linear levels with floating blocks and progressive power-ups, but the focus is once again on collecting treasure. Like in the last game, the amount of stuff you have determines what ending you'll get, but you also need to find one key per level to progress. This game's main gimmick is being able to jump between the foreground and the background, obviously to take advantage of the Virtual Boy's capabilities. It could have easily come off as intrusive, but it's handled well, and it never feels like it gets in the way of platforming. It complements the gameplay instead of obstructing it. There are 13 main levels to go through as well as a few bosses, and that's basically my only complaint with the game. It's short, like way too short. My total playtime for this game was under 2 hours, and I wasted a ton of time looking for secrets and stuff. It makes sense as to why they did this, since the Virtual Boy itself did cause eye strain. I would still recommend that you play this game, since it's definitely the single most overlooked one I'm going to be talking about today. The thing with the first two Wario Land games is that I find them harder to recommend, not because they're bad or anything, but because they take a lot of inspiration from Mario. So if you like Mario, which I think most people do, you'll like these games. But that brings up the question of, why not just play a 2D Mario game instead? Well, I can't speak as highly of Wario Land 1, but Virtual Boy Wario Land definitely has its strengths, which I think go a long way in setting it apart. The entire game taking place underground would give off the impression that the settings would all be boring dark caves, but there's a surprising amount of visual variety. We have underground deserts, forests, watermelon fields, and even a mansion. The developers pretty much did all that they could to make the levels feel distinct from one another, with the limited color palette. Looking for keys in each level forces you to be more exploratory, and finding treasure rooms also helps in enticing you to explore. Some levels kind of have keys that are harder to find, but it's hardly enough of a problem to be a detriment to the game itself. What does kinda suck is that a lot of secrets and stuff require you to have a specific power-up, which is annoying. Thankfully, power-ups don't despawn if you move away from them, so if you found one earlier in the level, you can always go back for it. Another strength of this game is the background-foreground gimmick. It may seem totally unnecessary, but its uses in boss fights are pretty cool, wherein the bosses attack you from the background. Some people may not like it, but to reiterate what I said earlier, I don't think it's very intrusive. So all in all, Virtual Boy Wario Land isn't the most complex platformer of all time, but it's a short experience that doesn't overstay its welcome, and most importantly, it's just fun. The only problems with this game are the unfortunate circumstances of the console it was released on, but I don't think I could put it into words better than AVGN did.
But it's actually a good game. Damn good. But only one problem. It's on Virtual Boy.
Oh my goodness guys, my stomach is rolling.
Wario Land 2 changed a lot for the Wario Land series, and you could make a solid argument for it being the most important game in the series. This is the game that made Wario immortal. You can't die, but enemies can change your state, and instead of just a linear platformer, it's more of a puzzle platformer in some ways. You have multiple win conditions in different levels, and generally it's just very detached from the Mario series. There's no power-ups, there's no floating blocks, it's just its own thing, and it really individualized the Wario series. Wario Land 3 naturally carries over a lot of the gameplay elements from its predecessor, like not being able to die and enemies changing how Wario himself functions. Although in this game, Wario starts with an extremely nerfed moveset. You can pretty much just jump and shoulder bash. You can't ground pound, you can't pick up enemies, and your shoulder bash is so weak that it can't break through some of the more reinforced blocks. However, this is actually a good thing. In Wario Land 3, your main goal in every level is to find a key that unlocks a treasure chest of the same color. In these treasure chests, you can find a number of things. Oftentimes they'll unlock the next level, and they'll also contain things that change parts of levels you've already been to. Like for example, you could find a chest containing seeds that make vines appear, unlocking new areas, and thus more places to find keys and chests. You can also gradually unlock parts of Wario's old moveset, and by the end of the game you're a complete powerhouse again. Now I love this sort of thing, a progression system where you get permanent upgrades in your arsenal of moves, which also serve the purpose of unlocking new areas, is the exact thing that makes Metroidvania games so much fun to me. Now, the world of Wario Land 3 is not one big interconnected map, but that's not a downside. In fact, the levels being self-contained makes jumping back and forth between all these areas bearable. If it was one big map, it would be hell to backtrack every time you unlock some new thing, which happens a lot in this game. The game is not without its flaws though. One thing that annoys me to no end is that you'll sometimes have a wall blocking your way, and the only way to get the wall to move is to play this golf minigame. This is all you ever really need coins for, and it gets old quickly. It wouldn't be so bad if it showed up like once or twice, but I swear it shows up in like 12 different levels. Even worse is that your reward for getting every single one of these music note coins is just another version of the golf minigame. Wario also looks kind of weird in this game. It's not just his color palette. I understand that that's a limitation of the hardware. He just looks sort of oddly round, and his hat is much smaller, making his entire head shape look kind of squished. I don't know, maybe it's just me. I've always thought Wario just didn't look like Wario in this game. In conclusion though, Wario Land 3 is open-ended game design done right. Every level kind of has its own thing going for it, even the ones that take place at similar geographic locations, and the progression system entices you just enough to keep you playing without it feeling like a drag. If you want something that's the furthest departure from the typical Mario platforming conventions, I'd say give Wario Land 3 a shot.
The Game Boy Advance.
I'm just gonna say this out of the gate. Wario Land 4 is my favorite game in the Wario Land series. Now, I don't think there's a bad game in this series, but if I were to recommend any game, I would recommend Wario Land 4. It's pretty much everything I'd ever want out of a platformer. The guy wrote an entire book that goes over every single screen in this game, and how it's well designed. That's how crazy people are about Wario Land 4. Now I know I'm hyping it up way too much, but this game basically took everything that made the last 4 games good and put it all into a blender and cranked the insanity all the way up. The levels themselves are back to being much more linear, but the way you tackle all of them is handled really well. There's a short intro stage that shows you the basic mechanics that you'll need to learn. You need to collect this little key ghost called Keyser to unlock the next level, and 4 pieces of a gemstone per level in order to unlock the boss door at the end of the passage. You also need to hit this frog switch and it'll start a countdown timer where you need to escape and get your ass out of the level. This is what I mean by them cranking up the insanity levels. These escape sequences are probably the most memorable parts of the game, just because they're inherently nail-biting. So the thing about these passages is that you can do them in any order. This system where you start with an intro level and then have a little mini world full of 4 levels and a boss definitely reminds me of Super Mario Land 2, which is fitting since that was Wario's debut game. No 2 levels look the same, and some of them have level-specific gimmicks. Wario can actually die in this game, and he has a health meter, but nonetheless enemies that cause you to change states still exist, and they're often used to solve puzzles and reach new areas like in the last games. In Wario Land 2 and 3, getting hit when fighting a boss usually meant you'd get kicked out of the arena, meaning you'd need to start the entire fight over if you messed up once. This was the trade-off of not being able to die. The game needed to impose some other punishment for getting hit by a boss, but it just ended up wasting your time. Also, it was a very real possibility that you'd get hit before knowing how the boss's pattern worked, so you really didn't have a fair shot at beating them on your first try. Wario Land 4 pretty much has the perfect balance. Having a more traditional health meter allows you some more leeway to learn how bosses work, without having to redo the entire boss fight from a single mistake. The bosses in this game can still waste your time, and it affects how much treasure you get, which, like in all the previous games, affects the ending of the game. Honestly, if they just had the treasure mechanic as well as Wario being invincible, I'd have said this was a pretty good fix to the problems with boss fights in Wario Land 2 and 3, but I think also having a health meter really just makes it perfect. It's such a standard thing in most video games, but a health meter in a Mario spin-off is pretty unconventional. Speaking of Mario, in terms of 2D platformers, Wario Land actually kind of replaced it for a while. If we don't count the Game Boy Advance remakes of Mario 2, 3, and World, the last original 2D Mario to be released before New Super Mario Bros. In 2006 was Super Mario Land 2 in 1992. That's a 14-year gap. And in those 14 years, 5 of the 6 games in the Wario Land series were released. Wario himself was an important character to Nintendo. He was super prominent in many of Nintendo's marketing ventures in the late 90s and early 2000s, in things such as the Game Boy Color promotional demo, as well as the infamous Wario apparition of E3 1996. The Wario Land series consistently tried new things, with almost every unique concept being pretty good, and the games were consistently good at showing off what the hardware they were released on could do. 2008 marked the last release for the Wario Land series, with Wario Land Shake It, and as of today, the series is effectively finished. I guess in Nintendo's eyes, it didn't make much sense to continue the Wario Land series if they were doing just fine with 2D Mario platformers. But that didn't stop the fans, baby. Pizza Tower is looking like it's gonna be a true Wario Land game in every area except its title. Its fast, frantic, and chaotic nature give off the exact same insane vibes as Wario Land 4, and I couldn't be happier. The soundtrack from what's been released so far is also amazing. If you're a Wario Land fan and you haven't checked out Pizza Tower, you're seriously missing out. The demos are completely free, so really there should be nothing stopping you. I didn't go into this video with like a thesis statement or a point to make, I just wanted to talk about some Wario games that I like. But if you want any takeaway from this, play Wario Land 4, and if you like it, absolutely play Pizza Tower. I want to reiterate that there isn't a single bad game in the Wario Land series, so really you can't go wrong no matter what game you pick. Wario Land is a godlike series, and above all else, I hope that this video gets more people interested in it.